All right. So, welcome everyone to our latest session of the Institute of Historical Research's Food History Seminar. My name is Dr. Brandy Simpson, and I am a West African food historian, and I teach at Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia, in the United States of America. We do have a couple of other of our conveners on with us. Kelly Spring, who of the Forkfront, she is en route to New York to promote her new book about spam. Also, Amalia Castro from the Universidad Mayor is with us. I don't know if Matt Matt Philpott is with us, an independent researcher. But yeah, we've got three of us conveners with you today. We are really excited to talk to DJ Sevillano of Northeastern University. And his paper will be Picture This, Photography, Pigs, and Philippine Tourism. And then we also have Mark Johnson from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And he is going to talk about what does it mean to be a pig eater. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, his paper is entitled Our Tastes Have Become So Perverted, Bacon and Race in the 19th Century United States. So each of our speakers will have between 15 and 20 minutes to read their papers, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end of which we'll be really excited to take your questions. So without further ado, we'll have Mark Johnson go first. Mark, if you wouldn't mind, kick us off.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Okay, so in this talk, I have done two things. I have excerpted a part of my upcoming book due out in about a month from today, American Bacon, The History of a Food Phenomenon with University of Georgia Press. But I've been expanding the excerpted section. I've been expanding it with new research over the last 6 to 9 months um, on bacon, black bodies, and laboring bodies, with special attention to the link between dietary advice and pseudoscientific racism in the 19th century United States South. So by the 19th century, US Americans had inherited centuries old viewpoints from Europe that pork, especially fatty and salty pork like bacon, was suited to hard laboring people, but that so-called brain workers should avoid it at all costs. So I'm going to start, as historians tend to do, at the beginning. So I just want to establish that this link between bacon and hard laboring bodies has a really old connection. In the early modern British Isles, for example, elites and urban dwellers were already looking down on rural peasants who almost exclusively ate bacon. They eventually developed bacon-related insults, referring to country folk as chaw bacons and bacon brains, akin to yokel or country bumpkin today. And according to these people, bacon became increasingly linked with the backwardness of rural people who lacked apparently educations, finer tastes, and most importantly, they worked hard with their bodies. By Tudor England and English colonization of the Americas, bacon had become unquestionably linked with rural people and hard labor. In the 17th century, English doctors tended to view bacon as essential to the health of the laborer, but not really suitable for anyone else. According to medieval medical scholar Thomas Cogan, the meaner sorts of people had stomachs like ostriches that can digest hard iron. In 1584, his Haven on Health served as a sort of health guide for the students at the Manchester Grammarian School. He observed that gross meat is meat for gross men, including salt bacon eaten by laborers, which was unsuitable for scholars like his students. He wrote, as is bacon, is in no way commended as wholesome, especially for students or such as have feeble stomachs. But for laboring men, he called it convenient. He said, in such kind of men, it forceth not much how wholesome meat be, so it fill the belly and keep strength. In 1676, Benjamin Thompson lamented the condition, this is an American, lamented the condition and lack of prosperity of New England after King Philip's War. From his perspective, a lot had changed as they crossed the Atlantic and had started waging war against the indigenous people of the continent. And here he writes in his poem, and here methinks I see this greasy lout, with all his pagan slaves coiled round about, assuming all the majesty's throne of rotten stump or the rugged stone could yield, casting some bacon rind looks, enough to fright a student from his books. So for Thompson, uncouth pagan people feature big bacon rind looks enough to distract studious, well-mannered people, thus sustaining the notion that Bacon sustained laborers but had little use for people who worked with their brains. So I start there to establish the extent to which these ideas have really deep origins. And for the plantation slave labor camp type of slavery in the United States South, especially the 19th century Cotton South, this centuries old dietary wisdom affected the diets of enslaved laborers. While noting that it can be hard to describe a quote unquote typical slave diet because it varies season to season, year to year, region to region, and enslaver to enslaver. The enslaved people testify in their slave memoirs and their interviews with the Works Progress Administration that bacon made up a large part of their diet. Throughout oral histories and written records, enslaved people and enslavers frequently testify or recognize 3 to 3.5 pounds of bacon per week as a sort of standard. In 1853, the Southern-based agricultural magazine DuBose Review recommended weekly provisions of 3.5 pounds of bacon to enslaved men who worked in the fields, 2.5 pounds of bacon to women and children who worked in the fields, and even less for men and women and children who worked indoors. In oral histories and written records, countless enslavers and enslaved people confirm about this much as their usual weekly ration. And this is Green Cumby, just one example of the aforementioned slave narratives. He says, we mostly lived on corn pone and salt bacon the master gave us. We didn't have no garden ourselves because we wouldn't have time to work in them. We worked all day in the fields and then was so tired we couldn't do nothing more. So to counter a growing abolitionist movement, enslavers took special care to advertise this ration of 3.5 pounds of bacon per week as especially generous to ward off criticism. Generous not only in its quality and its amount, but of its suitability to enslaved black laborers. In 1849, for example, slaveholder John T. Lee of Mississippi says, I give each of them 3.5 pounds of bacon, clear of bone, and some of the same quality that I use myself, as well as corn, molasses, and, quote, a liberal supply of fresh meat. In the early 1860s, the Alabama State Supreme Court actually rules that slaveholders had to provide a minimum 3 pound per week ration, lest stingier enslavers risk pushing their human property right to the point of rebellion to the detriment of the entire system. So in the United States, bacon became synonymous with hard physical work, and the emerging generation of dietary scientists confirmed this wisdom with their research. They consider it suitable for people on the frontier, on the farm, and then especially enslaved Black Southerners. Bacon, from long experience, is known to be the most healthy meat diet in the world, wrote Southern cultivator, particularly for Negroes who do most of the labor on the cotton plantation, they added. By portraying bacon as suitable for Black laboring bodies, but not suitable for white people, they were linking their research to centuries old wisdom on humoral theories. First, they they accomplish a few things. First, they stave off abolitionist criticism that they mistreated enslaved laborers by portraying this diet as perfectly healthy and even nourishing for them. Second, they contribute to emerging pseudoscientific ideas along with all those other things like phrenology and the so-called sciences of racial difference that link it to corporal difference. And the physician John S. Wilson confirms some of these ideas. He considers a high fat diet essential to laboring people, especially enslaved people. He wrote, between Negroes and hogs, there seems to be congeniality in more respects than one. Fat, bacon, and pork are peculiarly appropriate for Negroes on account of their habits of life, he says. And then another doctor agrees, says that enslaved people need bacon for the sake of their health and appearance, and that you can, quote, distinguish a bacon fed Negro by the sleek appearance and lack of tuberculosis. So, in the pseudoscientific racism of the 19th century, cold and wet humors are linked with tuberculosis and linked with white women and with black men. So, while cold and wet humors, as well as tuberculosis, suit white women just fine, according to this logic, this is not so good for laboring black bodies. As the racist reasoning goes, black men need strength giving and heat generating foods to balance out hot and dry humors in their body. So while many physicians, nutrition scientists, and pseudoscientists start to argue that enslaved people need bacon to thrive, they also start to suspect that the South's overall health is suffering from a dependence on bacon. No doubt a large amount of disease in the South and West is caused by the excessive use of fat bacon and salt pork. In Southern Cultivator, another writer links salt pork, worst of all, smoked pork, with dyspepsia, biliousness, cutaneous eruptions, and skin diseases. And an anonymous author says pork should, as a general rule, be avoided by all white men and especially all white women, according to the logic, which had its basis in these ancient humoral Galenic theories about pure blood and the balances of black and yellow bile. Avoiding bacon would keep white blood pure and white skin clean and clear. So many planters assured themselves and their critics that fattier pork like bacon, fatback, etc., helped working people, especially black slaves, more so than leaner meat. According to one Southern medical professional, it is, however, a well-known fact that the more exhausting the labor, the fatter the meat, which the Negro's appetite craves, and it agrees well with him. And at the same time, they believe that, quote, the best food of this class is fat bacon and pork, corn and peas, as these abound in oil, which is a heat generating element, right? So, per the notions of race at the time, black bodies supposedly could not generate their own heat and so needed heat giving foods to complete their labor. In a February 1860 column of the Health Department, Dr. Wilson says that boiling and broiling instead of frying are better ways to cook fattier meat. Frying is the most objectionable of all the culinary processes, and possibly this is the reason why it is perhaps more in vogue than any other mode of cooking. He goes on to say, it does really appear that our tastes have become so perverted and depraved by bad habits that we almost inevitably fall into the wrong way. And he adds that the United States of America might properly be called the Hog Eating Confederacy or the Republic of Porkdom. So while Wilson separates people into delicate and active classes with enslaved laborers among the most active, right, suitable only for people in a cold climate or active people in a warm climate like the US South. He added that no diet would be more injurious. On one hand, white women should avoid bacon at all costs. In the mid-19th century, medical professionals like Wilson are still rooting their dietary advice in these ancient humoral theories. And all of this has implications for their ideas about racial categorization. So, in mostly undetectable ways, ancient ideas about the body and its humors still lingered into the medical advice of the 19th century. And then, even, and this is where I'll wrap up, the consumer wisdom of the 20th century. When the National Pork Board surveyed mid 20th century women at a Iowa grocery store, they linked pork with difficult digestion and they linked pork with being unsuitable for the summer months, preferring pork only in the winter. By the end of the 20th century, a breakfast of bacon and eggs seemed suitable only for someone about to rustle cattle or farm all day. So this is just one part of the story of how bacon, although it seems everywhere these days, has actually been disdained, lamented, condemned, and vilified for most of its history. At best, it was a mundane staple for everyday life before refrigeration, and at worst, it was a literal threat to the health of the body, especially the white female body, the nation, and the human race.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm really got lots of questions. Uh, all right. Up next, we have JG, who's going to share with us. Yep. There's, are you ready?
Yeah, just give me a second.
Yep.
And that's my email. Wonderful.
Lovely.
Cool. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks, Brandy, for kind of moderating and for the wonderful intro. Just want to also thank everyone behind the scenes. The collaborative labor in making this wonderful seminar series possible does not go unnoticed. I also want to thank Dr. Mark Johnson for agreeing to work on this session with me. And all the generosity and mentorship over the past few years has been really great. So I'm in the early stages. I'm in the first year of my postdoc, and so I'm kind of in this stage of transition, but I'm also in the early stages of revising my dissertation into a book project. So I'm really happy to field questions and comments and feedback during the Q&A on all of it. But the tentative title for the larger book is Nose to Tail: Culinary Epistemologies and Filipino American Gastropoetics. And broadly, it's concerned with understanding how the Philippines gets constructed through alimentary terms and how food literatures are vital discursive technologies of US empire, which I'm happy to chat more about later if you're interested. But my talk today is titled "Picture This: Photography, Pigs, and Philippine Tourism from 1928 to 1933," which is based on the book project's first chapter. And then rather than provide you with a kind of singular argument, my talk today, which will hopefully offer you a kind of multi-sensorial experience of some of the worlds and worldings I investigate in the book project. And then moreover, I don't follow a normative linear temporality nor a kind of defined set of cartographic bounds. Instead, in the larger book chapter, I journey from the tienda to la mesa as I highlight the pig's journey from the marketplace to the butcher's block to the roasting spit, and then finally at the dinner table. And then as a visual and textual reproduction in the circuits of the tourist economy. And today I'll mainly focus on the two sites highlighted here, the butcher's block and the dinner table. So, selling an Orientalist Southeast Asian experience to its foreign customers, the American colonial government saw an opportunity to exploit the iterative process of Americanization on the islands as a way to increase profits from additional tourism. In 1930, James King Steele, also known as the publicist of the Far East, was appointed the manager and executive secretary of the Philippine Tourist Association. He routinely met with transportation executives, national leaders, and members of the general public, usually wealthy, to invigorate their interest in traveling to the Philippines. A true showman, he would transform his office into, quote, a veritable museum of things Filipino: wicker furniture, examples of wood carving, native brasswork, bolos from the Igorot country, swords and daggers from Moro land. with head axes, shields, and spears as decorative features. However, perhaps his most important tools of persuasion were his visual promotional materials. With a camera strapped to his side at most of times, Steele created a vast visual archive of promotional material that he would then present through films, lantern slides, and motion picture projector to entice possible American tourists. Steele was an active participant in the construction of particular ideas regarding Philippine foodways during the American colonial period. In other words, the shifting semiotics of Philippine pig roasting and the visual economies of racial consumption captured by American tourists was a way in which foodways were utilized in the imperial logics and racialized and gendered taxonomies of US mythmaking during the time. According to a study of the hog industry conducted by Jose Noguera y San Agustin and published in the Philippine Agriculturalist and Forester, the native hog to the Philippines is, quote, long and narrow in conformation and has a long snout, long legs, and a weak back. Their predominating color through the islands is black. The native swine are wonderfully hardy and prolific. The pigs are strong and the proportion that live is high. He also notes that there's always a good market for hogs in all parts of the islands, both for local consumption and for shipment to the larger towns or cities. Hogs supply the local meat demand to a large extent. These findings were also then confirmed by an ethnographic study conducted by Roy F. Barton under the auspices of the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. He notes that in the highland areas of the Ifugao, near Baguio Marketplace, which it was a frequently visited site by the Americans who were seeking respite from the tropical climate. Pigs and chicken were very carefully tended to. Pigs of the Benguet, Igorots, and Ifugao peoples were used in ritual sacrifices and food, with the former being the primary use and the latter being their secondary. Pigs at the marketplace were sold based on numerous factors, perhaps most important its size, and for sows, how many litters of pigs it had already borne. Steele's image of the pig market highlighted the diversity of Philippine pig and boar breeds present on the islands. Disparate in body size, pigmentation, color, maturity, and purpose, these pigs were spread across the field. The larger, heftier of the pigs had been grouped together in large clusters around piles of feed to draw the attention of interested eyes nearby. These pigs were either destined for the local dinner tables or to be sold at a retailer in nearby cities such as Manila. The smaller and younger of the pigs, known as suckling pigs, were kept closer to the gate, tied with a simple leash made out of a rope. Perhaps they were kept further away from the older and larger of the pigs for their own safety. These suckling pigs were often most used in the village pig roasts meant to feed a large group of people. And just quickly, and for those who have not had the pleasure of being invited to a Filipino house party, lechon is a spit roasted suckling pig. It's a traditional Philippine dish that has graced many dining tables as the main centerpiece. Often enough to feed a whole village or a whole house party. Lechon is a labor of love that's required the work of many hands. This communally cooked and eaten dish requires skillful butchery, precise open fire roasting technique, as you see here, and a lot of patience. So after being sold at the marketplace, the next step in the pig's journey from farm to table is its eventual dissection at the butcher's block. The butchery of animals is a historically and culturally specific form of gendered labor, often performed by men. These photographs captured moments of productive labor that reinforced the physical capabilities of the Philippine native and further racialized and gendered their bodies. In other words, the body of the Philippine laborers were utilized for its generation of productive capitalist value twice. First, in real time as the native completes their physical work, and second, as a reproduced image through the visual economies and networks of the American colonial period. Acts of open-air butchery were commonplace in the barangays, the Tagalog term for the Philippine village or locality. However, in the metropole of Manila, mataderos or slaughterhouses shielded the general public from having to bear witness to these acts of animal dismemberment. In Manila, all livestock, hogs, cattle, sheep, goats, intended for the marketplace were killed and butchered at the matadero, which were equipped, inspected, and maintained by the city, and were subjected to the laws, rules, and regulations set by the Manila government. So in the first photo, the butcher stands atop the highest stair of the market stall stoop, with bare toes tucked under an oversized plank of wood serving as a cutting board on the floor. He brings the sharp blade to the pig's throat. Because the action is obfuscated by both the camera's out-of-focus lens and the angle at which Steele is taking the photo, it's unclear why he's doing this. However, two possibilities come to mind. One is that the pig butcher is following a common technique of blood draining, as seen in the other highly circulated photos of natives in the colonial archive. The process begins with the butcher making a small to medium sized incision at the throat. Then he allows the blood to drain from the animal's body, which is emptied into a receptacle of sorts to either be discarded, used in other animist traditions, or utilized in cooking dishes like dinuguan or a vinegar-laced pork blood stew. But the other possibility, and the more likely of the two that I think, right, is that the butcher begins the process of removing the pig's face from the body, which is noticeably missing from the next two photos. The face of the pig, or the mascara, is full of additional meat, fat, cartilage, bone that could be used in a number of other Filipino dishes and recipes. One is the be ever becoming more popularly recognized and beloved around the globe, in part thanks to probably the late Anthony Bourdain, is sisig, which is made used of using the cuts of offal and parts of the mascara. In the second photograph, Steele moves slightly further back from the butcher's block, but positions himself at a more perpendicular angle in relation to the stoop to get a better view of the butcher's work. While Steele moves one step up, the butcher takes one step down to give himself more leverage over the pig's carcass. Needing to make a slice through the pig's entire abdomen, the butcher rotates the pig's carcass to ensure that he has proper access to the parts of the pig that he will butterfly open. With the pig's back now turned to Steele and his camera, the second photograph shows the butcher in the process of opening the pig's body by grabbing the right foreleg with both hands and lifting up until he hears a familiar crack, indicating the dislocation of the shoulder bone, making the process of splitting the pig in half easier. This technique of butterflying the hog will allow the butcher or future cooks to stuff the inside of the pig with desired spices, herbs, and or other ingredients for a perfect lechon. Commonplace ingredients include alliums like garlic, onion, and chives, or lemongrass, and other aromatics, removing any unwanted gaminess from the pork. Opening the pig up will also allow for more of an even cook of the pig's meat throughout the roasting process. In the third and last photograph of what I'm calling the kind of pig butchery sequence, Steele makes the final move. This time, he takes a step closer to the butcher and sets up his camera so that the bottom of the butcher's block is aligned with the bottom of the photograph. Having replaced the thinner, sharper knife with a small axe that was sitting on the cutting board in the first two images, the butcher hacks away at the hardened bones of the pig's rib cage to complete the butterflying process of the carcass. The butcher, with one foot on street level and the other one planted on the step, makes light work of the pig in the scene. His rather relaxed body language, with one elbow resting on his upper thigh, indicates that he's probably completed this butchery process many times before. It's evidenced in bringing by the second cutting tool, the axe, only when necessary and not a moment too soon. This is also indicated by the wholeness of the pig's body itself. What I mean by that is that although the pig's body is splayed open, its body remains intact, a signal of proper preparation and butchery. Because of the butcher's experience, the viewer is spared from what could have been a rather gory scene of blood, guts, and massacre. Rather, Steele captures an exemplary case of the masterful native labor and technical prowess necessary to the culinary process of pig roasting. Ultimately, Steele's butchery sequence captures a moment of a colonial encounter at the alimentary site of the butcher's block. While this act of mundane butchery was probably a routine occurrence at this market stall, Steele's own greedy eyes photographically captured this moment in order to both orient American onlookers to the cultural and social foodways of the Philippines and further orientalize Filipino subjects and their foodways. And by way of conclusion, I think I want to take you to what is perhaps the logical end of a talk on the topic of food, which is the dining table. Um, Seated at a banana leaf cloaked table, Sally Custer, a white American tourist, is joined by two Filipino women who go unnamed. All three women are dressed in traditional Filipino clothing, ready to partake in a kamayan feast. A kamayan is a meal in which you use only one's hands to eat, so without utensils. At the center of their feast is a whole roasted pig. The lechon is surrounded by other native foods and ingredients such as mango, coconut, citrus fruits, camotes, and small banana leaf parcels, which are most likely stuffed with steamed rice. This al fresco dining experience captured by Steele is an example of a typical fiesta meal on the islands, albeit a simpler one suited for the appetites of just three ladies. Unlike the previous images I examined in the book chapter, these photos of ladies lunching are highly staged and intentionally captured by Steele's camera in specific ways. And what I mean by this is that these photos were taken from several different angles, as you can see, with some closer to the dining table, some further away. These three women appear to be in directed poses. The three photos taken straight on from the dining table are perhaps the most staged out of those in the photo set. And this is evident in the way that Sally and the two Filipinas are seen staring straight into the lens of the camera, their soft smiles most likely the result of following Steele's direction behind the camera. All three women are wearing a version of the terno, which can be identified by the iconic Filipino butterfly sleeves that have become markers of the national and gendered identities for respectable Filipinas during the American colonial period. Butterfly sleeves, a variation of the tulip-shaped sleeves popularized in the 19th century, accentuate the shoulders of the wearer, giving the illusion of a butterfly about to take flight. Steele notes on the back of one of these photos how, quote, very beautiful and becoming these Filipino costumes were. Despite the black and white photographs, I think it's evident that the garments that these ladies were wearing were highly decorated and embellished with detailed floral embroidery. Um, these woven fabrics were only worn by the elite at the time, seeking to establish a clear, unified, and hegemonic visual identity through their wardrobe. Elite Filipinos would use the terno as a signal for social uplift and progress. This both differentiated them from the lower classes of Filipinas and aligned them with the colonial apparatus of national power. As Dr. Genevieve Clatario underscores, dressing in fashionable ternos and earning praise for her sartorial performances in the popular media also helped solidify a woman's place in high society. Moreover, images of Filipino womanhood become strategic tools with which to counter the US stereotypes of Filipino backwardness and savagery that justify the colonial project. While perhaps not one and the same, I do find it significant that in Steele's photos, the women were both wearing the newly considered style of dress for the modern Filipina and eating lechon, which became a celebrated form of cuisine by American tourists. Extending Clutario's argument to the realm of foodways, like the terno, I think that the pig roasting and lechon became fertile ground on which to construct a narrative of nationalist progress and maturation that simultaneously evoked a sense of readiness for independence and obfuscated the destruction of US colonialism. In other words, lechon, once a symbol of primitive Philippine culture, is now a sign of progress that reflected back to the American colonialists their own ideals of independence, modernity, and consumption, and their skills as benevolent assimilators. American visions of Philippine foodways aided the myth-making narrativization of the Philippine Islands as both a colony needing American governance and subsequently a nation ready for independence. Understanding how these culinary imaginaries have developed over the course of the American colonial period is key to what I think understanding how empire has been and continues to be built through the mundane logics of cultural and culinary labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, JG. That was amazing. I really enjoyed these two talks. We're going to go ahead and go to our question and answer session.